Our next keynote lecture is given by art historian and philosopher Kerstin Thomas, who joins us from the University of Mainz, followed by a respondent by Adi Efal, who we heard earlier on. So without further ado, Kerstin, please.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, Samuel Short, Adi as well. And I thank you very much for this really good atmosphere here, intellectually, but as well personally. And so I start directly. This conference addresses the question of whether and how the basic tenets of speculative realism are pertinent to a revision of art historical methodology. The challenges connected with answering these questions are worth tackling, in particular because the recent unease within art history towards language-centered structuralism and post-structuralist theories has increased the search for the ontological and epistemological status of the image. Questions as to what an image is, if it's irreducible to language-like structures, and what we can discover in and know through art, and ultimately which epistemic regime art requires, have been of central importance in art history since the visual turn in the 90s. In order to discuss the potential of a speculative art history based on speculative realism, I will analyze the positions of two art historians, which is Henri Fossion and Maya Shapiro. They provide a good starting point for the question outlined because they both attempt to develop a concept of form which overcomes the idealism and language-centeredness of certain art historian methods. Both scholars published their great books on Romanesque art in the year 1931. Fossion, his L'art des sculpteurs romans, Recherche sur l'histoire des formes, and Maya Shapiro, his 1929 dissertation on Moissac in Art Bulletin. Both performed a methodological turn in the study of Romanesque art by placing emphasis on formal analysis and distancing themselves from an art history interested in questions of iconography and style. Both scholars were experts in their field, but at the same time both were open towards the concrete aspects of artistic production. This openness was due to familiarity with the process of making art. Fossion's father Victor was a famous aquafortist, and Henri learned about the artist's profession from his early on. Henri drew himself. So you see here one picture of Henri Fossion and another one. And he felt connected to artists and art critics from his father's circle throughout his life, such as Eugène Carrière, Auguste Rodin, Claude Monet, and the critic Gustave Geoffroy. Maya Shapiro also produced an impressive amount of art over the course of his life. Alongside studying art history, he attended the National Academy of Design, so I will show you just briefly some of his artworks. His extensive circle of friends included artists such as Robert Motherwell and Barnett Newman. And this is a sculpture. From the speculative perspective of a speculative art history, three of Fossion's and Shapiro's basic positions appear particularly pertinent as they correspond to the basic stipulations of speculative realism. First, an understanding of the artwork as an object. Second, the conception of different relations within the process of art making instead of the exclusive relation between artist and pure matter. And third, the model of a dynamic form or dynamic forms. I will therefore focus on these three areas. First, the work of art as object. The most important tenet that all speculative realists share is the rejection of what Quentin Meillassoux calls the correlationist position that world can be reduced to thought and language with a silent remainder. Meillassoux' view that there is being without thought, that there are entities which exist independent of any cognitive reference to them, strengthens the idea of objects that are autonomous, with a reality of their own. Of course, this is a position of cognitive theory which is not readily applicable to the question of how we approach art. But the re-evaluation of the object as an entity with its own reality, inherent in Meillassoux' critique, does offer great potential for the way we deal with works of art, objects which per se defy complete rational and linguistic comprehension. In rejecting the instrumental definition of the object used by formalism, which focuses on style and iconography, Henri Faucillon and Maya Shapiro forge a path towards a new object-oriented understanding. It is important to both scholars to emphasize that works of art, are objects with a reality of their own, and that they are more than mere representations of an artistic idea or products of an overriding cultural or stylistic movement. Henri Faucillon opens his The Life of Forms, published in 1934, by writing. So I will, this is another, they were exhibited, the works of Maya Shapiro, so you see the catalog. So I have always the English form because to make it more fluent, I put the English translation made by George Kubler, so it's a good translation as well, who was a student of Faucillon, and down you see the original French citation, so quotation. He's writing, Faucillon, a work of art exists only insofar as it is form. In other words, a work of art is not the outline or the graph of art as an activity. It is art itself. It does not design art, it creates it. A work of art, according to Faucillon, lays claim to singularity. It is in itself absolute and not the result of a system, be it a formal system as proposed by Vienna School or a Geistesgeschichte, history of ideas in Dvorak terms. In an interview, Maya Shapiro voices a similar opinion. In opposition to the pragmatist philosophy of John Dewey, he states that the work of art forms its own world beyond the viewer. Consequently, both scholars afford the work of art its own reality and distinguish it strictly from the experience of the viewer. In The Life of Forms, Henri Faucillon describes the space inhabited by the work of art as an independent world which encounters the world of the real, but adheres to its own principles. The imaginary worlds of ornamental space, of scenic space, and of cartographic space having rejoined the space of the real world. Henceforth, the life of forms must, it would seem, manifest itself according to unalterable rules. But nothing of this kind occurs, for, intoxicated by its own powers, perspective at once goes headlong to meet its objectives. Maya Shapiro later elaborates on this. The space of the cathedral is intensely expressive, but it is a constructed ideal space, appealing to the imagination and not an attempt to transpose the space of everyday life. The artwork becomes an object which is subject to its own rules. It is important to stress that Faucillon's and Shapiro's idea of the artwork's own reality is not to be equated with Platonic idealism, in which the artwork represents the world of ideas and as such is essentially inaccessible to the observer. The thought rather has its roots in Fossillon's and Shapiro's Marxist orientation and is materially founded. In this sense, artistic forms are not merely reflected ideas, but they are entities which vitally prompt action and which can cause things to happen. Fossillon writes, "Forms always are tending towards realization. They do, in fact, realize themselves and create a world that acts and reacts. Forms never cease to live in their separate state. They still clamor for action. They still take absolute possession of whatever action has propagated them in order to augment, strengthen, and shape it. They are the creators of the universe, of the artist, and of man himself. They become agents, things somewhere between matter and spirit." And again, Fossillon, "At the crossroads of psychology and physiology, forms arise with all the authority of outline, mass, and intonation. If for a moment we cease to regard them as anything but concrete and active forces, powerfully at work among the things of matter and space, we will find ourselves touching in the mind of the artist no more than the larvae of images and recollections, or at best the most rudimentary gestures of instinct." And in another passage he writes, "Matter, even in its most minute detail, is always structure and activity, that is to say, form." Fossillon draws on William James when stressing that the form as agent has the potential effectiveness of a gesture. If it be true, as James has shown, that every gesture exercises on the life of the mind an influence that is none other than the influence of all form, then the world created by the artist acts on him, acts in him, and acts on other men. Based on his interpretation of the artwork as an entity, Shapiro also concludes that works of art have agency. In his presentation, The Social Basis of Art, given at the first American Artists' Congress in 1936, Shapiro explicates that art has its own conditions which distinguish it from other activities. It operates with its own special materials. So both Shapiro and Fossillon see art not as a passive mirror of society or of the artist, but rather as an active agent with real power to move. The idea is that artworks are to be taken seriously as entities, not just having an effect, but with the power to initiate action, has been widely taken up and developed in art history in the context of the visual turn since the 90s. W.J.T. Mitchell sums up this idea simply and concisely by asking, "What do pictures want?" That's also the title of his book of 2005. Horst Bredekamp emphasizes the agency of artworks with the term picture act, in German Bildakt. So, second, the relation and model. As important as it is to recognize the work of art in its materiality as autonomous entity and as possessing agency, one must also be aware that there are far-reaching problems connected with this, particular with Bredekamp. An approach that sees the artwork as independent entity is in danger of construing it as an organism, which is ultimately thought of as anthropomorphous. The work of art would derive meaning by analogy with the meaningfulness of human existence, a meaningfulness which cannot be inferred through external rational structures. Henri Fossillon and Maya Shapiro already recognized these problems incurred by such an organic understanding of the world of art. This is what Fossillon means when, drawing on the founder of semantics, Michel Breal, he warns against viewing form as a living being. And two, I'm fully aware of the criticism raised by Breal against every science of forms that realizes forms as such and that construes it as a living entity. Where within this multifarious and yet highly organized world are we to consider mankind as standing? Have we left in it room for the mind? Henri Fossion and Maya Shapiro shows us how this essentialist trap and therefore a new idealism can be avoided, while at the same time enabling an explanation of the specific ontological character of artworks which distinguish them from idea or pure matter. Although they stress the artwork as an entity independent from their viewers and therefore stress its object status, they do not understand it as a closed unit, but rather as a place of negotiation between human actions, material, and ideas. The forms of the work of art are inconceivable without the interaction of the artists, even though they cannot be seen as mere products of his mind. This becomes clear in Fossion's comments on touche as a moment in which the artist's tool touches matter and creates a form with its own value, color, weight, density, and movement. In the zone of contact, as he says, the indestructible traces of ardent and vigorous life emerge. The life of forms, or the reality of the artwork, is not simply a reflection of an inner and independent life fed by a life force. Such a vitalist stance is often attributed to Fossion when he studied in the context of contemporary thinkers such as Etienne Souriau and Henri Bergson. In fact, though, Fossion translates the vitalist approach into a relational model which is opposed to such substance thinking. The tension resulting from this are revealed by Fossion in the opening sentence of his book. Whenever we attempt to interpret a work of art, we are at once confronted with problems that are as perplexing as they are contradictory. A work of art is an attempt to express something that is unique. It is an affirmation of something that is whole, complete, absolute. But it is likewise an integral part of a system of highly complex relationship. Fossion's approach goes beyond an anthropomorphical substantialist understanding of living form. He views the form as the result of a contact or touch between material and human. Analogously, in the discussion following his presentation at the American Anthropological Congress in 1953, Maya Shapiro argues that every artistic form is the result of a meeting of the properties of the material and the gestures of a human hand. According to him, one can recognize these elements of touch in the narrow traces left on stone by the tools, the pressure applied, the distribution, and the momentum. We sense that, Shapiro, these are operations of the human hand, that there is somebody speaking, doing, acting. By understanding form as the result of a contact between artist and material, Fossion and Shapiro avoid every kind of idealism which sees artworks as bearers of ideas, be that the ideas of the artist or metaphysically charged ideas in a Platonic sense, of anthropomorphic sense, that things with a soul. However, when the work of art is viewed not as a mere expression of its substances, but rather as a place of contact between color, canvas, stones, and the hand, tools, and the ideas of the artist, then the question arises as to the meaning of the work of art and how this meaning can be accessed. Because if one divests the artwork of its rational character, in other words, if one views it not as an intelligible substrate, then explaining the epistemological relation to it becomes problematic. To solve this problem, Fossion and Shapiro offer concepts of knowledge and truth which are completely unidealistic. In my opinion, their approach is remarkable because it preserves the character of the work of art as a specific and material object, while avoiding the trap of essentialist substance thinking. For Fosillon, the artist's knowledge of his work cannot be described as a notion of form, but rather as process, which is directly realized in concrete action. According to him, the artistic idea is procedural, even in the mind, in the way that it is being painted or being kneaded. The artist doesn't see abstract ideas, but rather tone, touch, modeling. Quotation, the hand in his mind is at work. It's very nice. In French, it's la main dans son esprit travaille. Fosillon added an essay entitled Éloge de la main, in praise of hands, to the second edition of Life of Forms. This title, in praise of hands, thus encompasses much more than a euphemistic upgrading of craftsmanship. It describes a principle of generating form in which meaning emerges from various factors of equal importance. It is not that formless matter is given a meaningful form by the artist, originating in his mind and as a product of his will, but materials with their own distinct expressiveness, which come into contact with the artist and through the artistic process take on form. Shapiro also binds knowledge to action. For Shapiro, action is not the implementation of a pre-mediated plan, but rather a process, which is based on a reciprocal relation between artist and material, form and man. In an interview conducted in 1993, he says, "What is a fact? According to most languages, it's a product of labor. Consider the word fact in German, Tatsache, which means thing done. In French, fait, which means made, or even the Latin base for the English word fact, which is the word factum and is related to manufacture, which means made by hand. What is the truth? The truth is what is made." The knowledge that an artist can have of his work is therefore neither instrumental nor is it abstract. This concept of knowledge provides a starting point for an epistemological model which draws on speculative realism, I think. The knowledge of an artist is neither the instrumental knowledge, which determines the application of tools, as in Graham Harmon's analysis of Heidegger, nor is it the knowledge of reflective distance, which Harmon analyzes in Heidegger's example of the broken tool. That is, the insight into the being of the tool at the moment in which it cannot adequately fulfill its use. Harmon advocates doing away with the antagonism between the instrumental and reflective knowledge of objects, which Heidegger separates in favor of a knowledge of objects which allows them a real existence. The position of the artist who plays a role in producing the work of art, and as such influences the work's reality, would accordingly be described as a position lacking the prerogative of interpretation. His knowledge of the work emerges through negotiation, through the involvement with the material, and as such it can never be complete. Dynamic definition of form. We have seen that Fosillon and Shapiro have a comparable understanding of the work of art, one that views artworks not as beings of substance, but as places of negotiation processes. This understanding requires a dynamic view of the work of art. A dynamic definition of the object is also a trait of speculative realism, but despite the fact that there is agreement about the dynamic nature of objects within the speculative realist movement, there is no agreement about how this dynamism is to be understood. Ian Hamilton Grant's theory that behind every phenomenal manifestation an active field of productivity can be assumed may be reconcilable with Fossion's understanding of living forms and could shed light on his view. According to Grant, forms are mere ephemeral appearances of an underlying dynamic principle. Fossion also maintains the concept of a dynamic principle which brings about forms. He writes, "The life of forms is renewed over and over again, and far from evolving according to fixed postulates, constantly and universally intelligible, it creates various new geometries, even at the heart of geometry itself. Indeed, the life of form is never at a loss to create any matter, any substance whatsoever of which it stands in need." In contrast to the natural objects which Grant has in mind, for Fossion, artworks as artifacts are inconceivable without human intervention, and therefore his dynamic principle is to be understood as a negotiation between two dynamic entities, material and artist. The artist alternates between a distanced reflexive role and a forming manipulative role. As Fossion writes in the last sentence of Life of Forms, "Even as the artist fulfills his function of geometrician and mechanic, of physicist and chemist, of psychologist and historian, so does form, guided by the play and interplay of metamorphosis, go forever forward by its own necessity towards its own liberty." This concept of freedom is no coincidence that this is the closing sentence of his book, is thoroughly emphatically charged by Fossion. In his view, the artist who is at the hub of things, and more specifically, the artist's freedom, enables the free forms of art, and these in turn, in their freedom, impact on the artist and society. Even if one is unsure about subscribing to this ethical utopian emphasis, one must admit that with this definition of freedom, Fossion succeeds in combining the different levels of reality of the work of art, and in describing every level as a dynamic principle in itself, material, artist, and society. Just as the negotiation process between artist and material moves between the poles of necessity and freedom, the relationship between the artwork and society is equally determined by necessity and freedom. He concludes, "It is the relationship between these three values that clarifies a work of art, not only as something that is unique, but also as something that is a living word in a universal language." Accordingly, the artwork is an entity, just as it is an agent in overarching structure. Fossion does not continue the thought. There is no conclusion to integrating an understanding of art and society. Let us turn back to Shapiro, who also sees the principle of dynamism at work, not only in the relationship between the artist and his material, but transfers it to the relationship between the work of art and society. Shapiro stated that art is social in its communicative and symbolic character because it is a language, and a language is social not only as a means of conveying meanings, but also through a common mode of transaction and reflection. Art not only communicates, but makes a community. The community that Shapiro refers to is to be understood as a concrete social community, which is not only influenced by art, but which can come into existence as a community through art. Shapiro's rejection of essentialist theories of art stems from his critical stance on an understanding of art as product, as an innate development process, and as independent from social conditions. This becomes apparent when in his criticism of Riegel and New Viennese School or Alfred Barr's modernism. The dynamism of form is, according to Shapiro, not to be understood as the result of a vitalistic driving principle which ultimately continues independently from humankind. Instead, Shapiro follows the anti-Stalinist Marxist views of the New York intellectuals with their criticism of nationalism, nativism, and anti-intellectualism. According to this perspective, the postulation of fully autonomous artistic forms is pure idealism. Art can never be pure. It is always subject to a constant process of negotiation and conflict with other factors or entities. The difference to Faucillon's dynamic relational model can perhaps be seen in the emphasis that Faucillon places in the autonomy of the work of art as an object. In contrast to this, Shapiro stresses the inexorability of the social reality with itself, influenced by the dynamic activity of the work of art. The dynamic of the object is accordingly determined by its substance as well as its efficacy as agent within socio-political relations. The questions that remain are: what implications does a view of the work of art as constituted by its own reality, its relations and dynamic processes, have for our understanding of it? Is it possible to understand it as a unit at all under these conditions? And finally, what is the perspective of the viewer, who is much further removed from the artwork than the artist in perception and reflective distance? Faucillon's theory can't help us here, but Shapiro's theory does shed some light on this. Although he does start with the unity of the work of art and doesn't reduce it to mere relations, in place of an essentialist understanding of unity of the artwork, though, he understands this unity as analogous to linguistic coherence. In his essay on perfection, coherence, and unity of form and content, he criticizes the idea of an immediate simultaneous perception of artworks, which is part of the essentialist concept of unity, describing it as a mystic ideal. An ideal, so now Shapiro's words, an ideal of perception which may be compared with the mystic's experience of the oneness of the world or of God. Instead, Shapiro sees the perception of an artwork as a process in which the individual parts are brought together and into relation with each other. To see the work as it is, one must be able to shift one's attitude in passing from part to part, from one aspect to another, and to enrich the whole progressively in successive perceptions. He describes this ultimately as a collective and cooperative process. It takes into account other seeings. It is a collective and cooperative seeing, he says. It becomes clear that Shapiro not only propounds a concept of negotiation of various factors as regards the aesthetic of productions, but also on the level of reception aesthetics. This too then can be described as a relational theory without being reduced to correlationalism, one which sees the coherence of an artwork as the result of a successive process in which various elements, factors, and agents, intelligible or not intelligible, are involved. By highlighting a continual process of reflection on the object and its perception as a central task for art history, Shapiro identifies the work of the art historian as an equally unending and experimental process as the work of the artist, within which the work of art is only a junction of mental and material movement. By citing the collective and cooperative seeing as paths leading to knowledge, he is equally describing this as dynamic, unending, and relational process. Although the art historian is more distant from the artwork than the artist, this does not lead to a unique epistemic position, because the meaning of the world is not considered to be an essence that can be discovered. There is no hermeneutic claim for truth. On the other hand, meaning is not considered to be completely opaque or to be the product of pure projection. Both scholars stress that the meaningfulness of an artwork lies in the specific pictorial quality of the forms, and that content is secondary. In response to the possible criticism that when objects are robbed of their content function, the form is just an empty shell, Faucillon states, can form then be nothing more than a void? Is it only a cipher wandering through space forever in pursuit of a number that forever flees from it? By no means. Form has a meaning, but it is a meaning entirely its own, a personal and specific value that must not be confused with the attributes we impose on it. Form has a significance, and form is open to interpretation, and so on. And he concludes by stating even more clearly, any likening of form to sign is a tacit admission of the conventional distinction between form and subject matter, a distinction that may become misleading if we forgot that the fundamental content of form is a formal content. The meaning of an artwork is not possible without its specific material existence. He writes in a different context, whereas a sign signifies an object, form signifies only itself. In Shapiro's writing, we find almost identical formulations. Shapiro speaks of the pictorial meaning of each figure as a form. It follows that expressivity is more than a quality of particular works of art. It is, in fact, a basic property of the visual sign, defined as the quality of its material and the traces of workmanship, the properties of mass, tone, touche de peinture, and trait gravé in Faucillon's term. Shapiro brings these ideas together in his essay Style, where he writes, what counts in all art are the elementary aesthetic components, the qualities and relationships of the fabricated lines, spots, colors, and surfaces. These have two characteristics. They are intrinsically expressive, and they tend to constitute a coherent whole. In aesthetics, the expressive quality of a work of art is described in just this way. The philosopher Suzanne K. Langer propounds the idea that artworks are in themselves meaningful, expressive forms in her book Feeling and Form of 1953. In other words, their meaning is not contingent on anything external to them. According to Langer, the expression of artistic form is not to be equated with the subjective expression of the artist. Instead, it is a visual articulation without fixed meaning of its own, which is independent from context. The expression of artistic form cannot be abstracted from the sensuous material from which it was created. Excerpts archived in Shapiro's literary remains show that he was familiar with and considered Langer's theories. So at this point, I would like to point out some questions instead of giving like a fazit, and some questions which seem for me interesting regarding to this question of this conference at whole, the question of a speculative art history. So first, to my mind, one of the most promising lines of inquiry is the problem of expression I outlined, because it highlights the problem that arises when combining a substance model and relational model. Richard Wollheim's idea on art and expression seems pertinent here. In his text Correspondence, Projective Properties and Expression in the Arts of 1991, Wollheim discusses the predication views which he rejects. Following this predication view, the naming of the specific expression of a represented landscape would follow psychological predication and is fought for this. He rejects equally the notion that this could be a purely projective description. Wollheim rejects both theories on the grounds that the first falsely attributes human qualities of expression to the artwork, while the second neglects the fact that the artwork really has expression of its own, which evoke the designation, and is no pure projection, therefore. Wollheim understands the expressional power of an artwork to consist in a correspondence relationship between its formal or material properties and the experiential knowledge of the viewer brought about through it. Wollheim ascribes a great deal of importance to the role of the artist in the expression of the artwork. The creative process is understood as behavior in which the expression is the result of successive artistic processes in which the artist alternates relentlessly between acting and adapting. So to some extent, Wollheim steers a course between two extremes and, like Phocion and Shapiro, presents a relational model in which action is key. This manages to limit the primacy of thought and to recognize the intrinsic expression of objects as such. And second, and now I come to my end, the model of ceaseless processes of negotiation could maybe pave the way for a perspective on art which combines production aesthetics and reception aesthetics. This would throw the problem of expression into relief by helping to explain the process as at play between material and artist, and artwork and observer, by not only labeling them as correspondence relations, as in Wollheim's theory, but by viewing the processes as containing possible obstacles and power relationships. So, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Kerstin. May I ask you to join the table for Adi's response?
So, thanks you, Kerstin, for a wonderful talk. It is so rich and suggestive that this wouldn't be a real comment. What I would try to say a few moments, more a kind of afterthoughts, scattered, divided into several leading points. I would also note that I worked from the German text. We decided that it is important to say that because Kerstin was so kind to send me it on time and I could work on it really, really good. But I refer sometimes to expressions that are to be found in the German text and not in the English text. So I will try to note when that is the case. And then I also integrated into my response a few quotes which appear also in Kerstin text, but I thought it wouldn't be so bad, perhaps. Repetition also makes a kind of a good effect of sedimentation. So let's see. So, one, what is real in the history of art? The first question that comes to mind when thinking about the relationship between art history and the present realist turn regards what is considered as real in both sides of the river. That is to say, what could be considered as real in art history on the one hand and in philosophical debates on the other. The question of the definition of realism has been and still is an open one, and one has to recall the ambiguities and equivocities of realism as an artistic attitude, as well as the ferocious debate around realism within the analytic tradition of the last decade. As it would be too much to demand of ourselves to give a satisfying account of this complicated map, I would only point out the basic structure, which is probably a common knowledge, that is to say, the known medieval debate between realism and nominalism. Within the classical framework of realism, one has to choose between two alternative positions. Either what is real is that which is essential, infinite, and eternal, or that the real is to be found in the ephemeral concrete. Indeed, holding at both edges of the stick is highly complicated conceptually, but not impossible. This applies also to the history of art. It is either usually one endows forms with the realist privilege, or one endows artworks with the realist privilege. From reading through the life of forms of Phocion, one could characterize Phocion's position generally as one tending towards forms. These are forms that hold the weight of reality. As Kerstin quote, I can say Kerstin, not Kerstin Thomas all the time. So as Kerstin quoted Phocion, thank you. As Kerstin quoted Phocion regarding forms, elles sollicitent l'action, elles sont créatrices de l'univers, de l'artiste et de l'homme même. Yet, in Phocion's ingenious version of formalism, the hand, the instrument, the productive gesture is part and parcel of the world of forms and cannot be disentangled. That is true also for Shapiro, quote, these are operation of the human hand, there is somebody speaking, doing, acting. As Kerstin states, both in Shapiro and in Phocion's conception of art, materiality and deed capacity, so here it's Kerstin's German notion of Handlungsfähigkeit. So materiality and deed capacity, Handlungsfähigkeit, are primary characteristics. Perhaps it is proper to note that the earlier precursor of this pragmatic formalism could be traced actually to Alois Riegel and to his concept of Kunstindustrie. 2. Work, things, objects, products. The second point to bring up in the framework of realism and the history of art, assuming that the factuality of the work has a role to play in the definition of the reality of art, is that it is vital to establish a proper vocabulary in order to refer to the sub-entities of the reality of art industry. Perhaps an effort is due to distill a precise vocabulary accounting for the various parts of what Kerstin poignantly titled the effectiveness of the work of art, so that when we say thing, we mean thing, and when we say work, we mean work, and when we say object, we mean object rather than work or thing. From the suggestion of both Phocion and Shapiro read in Riegel, with Riegel in mind, one could suggest that the term product or produit, in order to refer to the atom of art historical inquiries. As Kerstin says regarding Shapiro and Phocion, the sense and meaning of an artwork are possible to describe in the analysis of art history as a result of an interrogation process working between the activity of the artist, quality of matter, society and spectator, as a product of interrogation and friction between numerous specific entities. Kerstin also brings the following quote from Shapiro. Consider the word fact in German, Tatsache, which means thing done, in French, fait, which means made, or even the Latin base for the English word fact, which is the word factum and is related to manufacture, which means made by hand. What is the truth? The truth is what is made. Kerstin emphasizes that the knowledge that the artist has of his work is neither instrumental nor abstract. The insistence on the term factum in historical inquiries goes back first and foremost, we have to remember, to Giambattista Vico, who ingeniously pled for a distinction between verum and factum within historical, that is to say, philological inquiries. For Vico, the basis of factum allows a plea for certainty in philological inquiries, as man is perfectly capable of analyzing what he himself has produced. 3. The poetical agent, and here I have to note that what Kerstin called agent was in her German text actually written as Akteur, and I found that much more ingenious than the translator into agent, so I developed that point a little bit. It is not enough to try and define that which is under consideration in art industrial reality. One has also to purge a definition of the producer. One of the most intriguing and fruitful suggestions I find in Kerstin's contribution is the concept of the acteur. Following Faucillon and Shapiro, Panofsky and Riegel, one could reach the conclusion that the actor is not necessarily the artist. Riegel's Kunstwollen, as well as Panofsky's iconological reading, is not concerned with an uncovering of an individual expressive psychology of the artist. Instead, a realist orientation allows to work out an elastic concept of the producer. Sometimes the producer can be indeed the artist, sometimes it is the patron, but sometimes these are the forms themselves or the wall upon which the picture is hung, and sometimes an idea which was working its way through various medium or history, etc., etc. In fact, the actor's identity, in my mind, is determined by the question that the inquisitor, that is to say, the art historian, asks in her inquiries. Different questions, different problems will produce different actors. At any rate, it would be impossible to know in the beginning of an inquiry who or what is actually the cause or the beginning of the work of art. And the art historian must at any moment be ready to rethink his presuppositions regarding the definition of the actor. A further reason for the fruitfulness of the concept of the actor is thus. Using the terminological set outlined thus far, the concept of the actor takes us to the world of theater and poiesis as the surface upon which works, artworks, or other works are produced, viewed and consumed. It is my conviction, partially following the work of Jacques Rancière and indeed Alain Badiou, that it is due time to replace the term of aesthetics as the term representing the theoretical field regarding artworks, similar to what was proposed in the first day of the conference. From the realist point of view, that I'm trying to outline, the term poiesis, whose original Greek meaning is to make or to produce, is fitting to denote this field of inquiry. Could one think of art history itself as playing a part in a theater, sometimes tragic, sometimes comic, which is the stage upon which products and pieces occur? In the poetical, theatrical occurrence, society makes an essential part, and as Kerstin states, this element is important also for Faucillon and Shapiro, and if I may add, also for Warburg, Riegel, and indeed Panofsky. One may conceive of a poetical communal reality in which various actors, art historians, advocates, nurses, and artists participate, to paraphrase Faucillon, the geometer and the mechanic, the physician and the chemist, the psychologist and the historian cooperate, enabling forms to activate their necessity and liberty by the play of metamorphosis. Two more short points with your permission. 4, style and genre. In the poetical domain, what occurs is generations. Things are generated and generating. Generations are formed and beginnings are searched for and determined. This may suggest that within a poetical framework of research, one would be looking for genre rather than for styles. Many structural problems are to be found within the concept of style, including also the manner Shapiro presented it in his famous essay. Being inherently an organicist concept, expressing a circular cohesiveness, the most severe problem with style is that it is an inherently a historicist notion. It refers to a singular phenomenon composed of organically forms, matter, society, economy, ideas, etc. And if you go to read Shapiro's essay on style, it is really amazing to see how organic his model is, how encompassing and totalizing. We will have the pleasure to discuss that. The generic poetic orientation, on the other hand, because it looks to detect repeating forms, figures, and formula, rather than to meaningfully describe singular historical events, offers a dim possibility of a way out of historicism in art history. History would then be conceived as an atlas composed of generic. Again, you can see Warburg perhaps talking there. Last point, metaphysical coordinates and tasks. Kerstin mentions both Bergson and Souriau as relevant to Faucillon's conception of the life of forms. I would add to this list also Etienne Gilson, whose reference to Faucillon in his writing, who refers to Faucillon many times in his writing about art, in fact. It was Gilson, working within the Aristotelian and the Thomist tradition, who suggested a return, actually, to the model of poiesis, very early in the 50s already, as a replacement of the aesthetic paradigm. Gilson was also talking about germinal forms as standing in the foundation of art. But indeed, the connection Faucillon-Souriau is an important one and must be further investigated. In 1929, Etienne Souriau published a book titled L'avenir de l'esthétique, in which he defined the new science of aesthetics as the one discerning forms, describing them in an orderly manner, culminating in giving an account of the dynamic reality of forms. Very, very close to Faucillon. Souriau then arrives at a rather original yet wholly heliomorphic and, if I may add, also spiritualist formulation. For him, reality is divided between two worlds, that of matter and that of form, between which the mediator is the spirit. Therefore, it is spirit that binds matter and form, rather form that binds matter and spirit, as is usually accepted. Now, if that is indeed so, as Souriau says, then the art historian, whose domain is exactly the meeting point between forms and materials, would be no less than in charge of the work of the spirit itself. Could one wish for herself a more demanding yet exhilarating task? Another question.
So maybe I should answer directly to some of the points, and then I open up quickly to you. Yeah, first of all, I think it's very good that you made a distinction between thing, work, object, product, and then you stressed on the role of the producer, which is also very important, the importance of the hand. But I wanted just once more to underline that an artwork is not only this what is made. So I think the interesting point is that, of course, there is a production process, but at the same time there are some entities which cannot be resolved or cannot be, by this productive plane, be completely understood or made intelligible. I think this is still important to underline, so that the work of art is not, as I think, I will go to this a little bit deeper, is not an organic whole, but it's in part a production, and it's in part something given, and it's in part, so it's a kind of field with a lot of entities, I think. So I would say at the end, the whole, what is the whole at the end? If we see an artwork as a whole, I mean, I would never see it as a whole. So it's never completed. It's always open. It's because it has this different realities. So I think it's and even Maya Shapiro, he sometimes in some of his texts, which is true, it seems that he has in mind this kind of artwork as a whole, but I think I found out the quotations which show that he's fully aware that this is not organic, but that the whole is only like a status which could be destroyed in each second, because which is very important for the artwork, is as well the one who sees it, the one who describes it. He constructs a part of it. So what is the artwork? It's I mean, it's never fully the same. It's always changing. So this I wanted to underline maybe once more. And maybe I stop here and we will go to other.
Should I answer the answer or?
If you want to.
No, I just two points. So I would still, in a way, insist and ask, why do you think? And it's, of course, we have to distinguish between your presentation of Faucillon, Shapiro, and Shapiro himself, and yes, and your vision of what is it to do art history. But I would really like perhaps to push or to insist on this point and ask, why do we need to say production is not enough? So what actually is this left over, which you believe, you find so important to insist upon? That would be.
So maybe you could, so I could ask back what is the, because if you said a synonym production, you made a synonym with poiesis, and so this would, maybe I would always think that you mean that everything is constructed by the plan of an artist. It's only the fulfillment of a plan. But maybe this is a too reductive idea I have of this term. So if you have a wider sense of this term, I would maybe agree with you. Yeah.
I see. Okay, and then just the second point about no, because we just talk. I will not continue the first point because we will have all our life to develop that. But hopefully, I think that only your description or your I would say more precise even picture that you gave us now on Shapiro's concept of I would say dynamic or open or search for temporary methodic totalities, for me only accentuate the problem with his position, with his historical, inherently historicist position. Because I think, I'm not an expert in Shapiro, but it seems to me that he develops his comprehensive model of style composed of all those different levels of meaning and elements, as really because he wanted to be a historian and because he wanted to account for that one-timely, singular occurrence, which is the work of art, which is society, and for me that makes us stay within the historicist, even accentuate the historicist direction in art history, and it's just because history is so important. For Faucillon, not so much, but.
Shall I answer again or not?
Let's maybe open it up to a question from the audience. Anyone? Yeah.
Thank you for the contribution of both of you. At one point, you mentioned the visual turn. I was wondering, is there a way to bring the visual turn together, to measure it against the speculative turn? Longer process, what images want, rather than what they are. Where is the agency as opposed to the distributed agency and all? Is there a way to somehow relate the visual turn, you said from the 90s, and the current speculative turn? And is it related to?
Visual turn, you mean?
Yes.
How this is related to?
Yes. Is there a relation? And how do you see that?
I would say that there is a high sensibility within art history which came from, or which is at the bottom of this movement of visual turn. And this was the unease of course, at the end of all these paradigms, like which came from the language turn. So is the unease that to describe artworks only like being resolved within notions, within linguistic notions or linguistic terms. And there was always this feeling, yeah, but that's not all. There is this field of visibility which has a direct impact or which has a direct meaning as well, which we cannot grasp fully with language. So, and I would say at this very bottom unease, I could see as well in this movement of speculative realism the unease that somebody thinks that all things are intelligible and can be fully resolved and fully understood with the human mind. And so I would say this is comparable. But I have some I have some problems with the visual turn positions, some of them, because I think they sometimes do tend too much to remystificate the object. And maybe that's also a problem within the speculative realism. You may discuss this in the audience, maybe. I think there, as well, as far as I read it, some positions where it's not so manifest like in the art historian literature, but maybe some idea of what is it what we cannot grasp. And it's always, of course, the question, is it only something we cannot understand because it's not understandable, or is there something higher? And so I don't know. And for example, Gottfried Böhm, I always think that he kind of, he's so Heideggerian, and there's something, the artwork erscheint, and it's a kind of Erscheinung, and we can't grasp it. So there's this kind of wonder before the existence. I mean, if you discuss with him, he's very intelligent. He would never say that he has a mysticist idea of artworks, but I sense it, and I feel a little bit unease about this. So that's all. Yeah, I don't know if that's...
Any other?
Just in relation to your last comment, I would suggest a kind of counter or opposite way of understanding these two positions, because the linguistic turn and the visual turn, they are actually they got to be thought together, because it's a kind of double bind. On the one hand, a linguistic turn is not just a language turn, but it's a certain understanding about language, meaning language or language is like arbitrary. It has no access to the referent. It has no access to the real. And this automatically asks or begs even for a visual turn, that then, how you describe it with Böhm, but many others could be mentioned, that then have this kind of vague, ephemeral, visual or aesthetical. That's exactly the part that is not accessible by via language. So I would rather say it's a double bind, and so this vague, this arbitrary post-Saussurean understanding of language, and this hypostatization of the sentient subject that could get access to something that the intellect cannot have. And it's a kind of weird dualism in a way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. That's a very good point.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Could you please put again the last quotation by Meyer Shapiro? Because for me it's very...
I will find it.
It is the very last one.
This one? No.
Yes, that's it. What counts in all art are the elementary aesthetic components, the qualities and relationships of the fabricated lines, spots, colors and surfaces. These have two characteristics. They are intrinsically expressive, and they tend to constitute a coherent whole. It's not, I have no question, but it's, I say that to make a link with my own lecture, that all I will say will be a critique, will be a declaration of war against this stages. So it is very important because Shapiro, it's not Shapiro who said that. It's all the tradition, all the aesthetic, all the Western aesthetic tradition, which is spoken in this quotation, from the Greek and the Alberti to modern theories. Voilà. It's just for you to.
Yeah. Thank you very much. But I would like to understand a little bit more how you understand this quotation, so that I can understand
that the expression is something. It's an horizon, and not the starting point for something else. They are intrinsically expressive. No. If the component of painting of an image are intrinsically expressive, I think that it means that everything is expressive. That it means that you have nothing to say about expression. That it's not a question of explaining what is expressive, but you can say anything about expressive. You cannot say this part of the image is more expressive than this one, because you say that they constitute a coherent whole, and the whole is expressive. But you cannot locate. You cannot find. You cannot locate an intensity or something which will be expressive.
Yeah, but I understand
the expression. The expression in this conception is something that you cannot divide, that has no internal differentiations. It's quite mystical. It's expressive. Oh yes, it's expressive, and then it's expressive. You cannot divide into expression, and that's why you speak about qualities and relationship of the fabricated line spot. Ça c'est. These are. C'est ce que je vais essayer de montrer, que these are not the components of the image. Yeah, forms, shapes, color, qualities. Of course, painting image has something to do with that, but painting doesn't reduce to.
Yeah, but I understand it on another way round. I understand this quotation behind the background what I was citing before. I think he wants to argue against something, so that's why he put it. He wants to argue against the notion that expression is some content of the artwork. And I think he just wants to say, I mean, it's maybe for this not a very good quotation. I think he wants to say that it's the means of an artwork, it's the everything formal in an artwork, which is expression, and not some special figure who, like Charles Lebrun, who is sad or something. So a content, which means an artwork. But I wouldn't say that lines and spot and colors are really elements which he adds and says this is and this is and this is and this is. But he only, it's like an explanation of formal things. So I would say it's like the Langer, it's like the Langer notion to say forms are expressive as forms because they are forms. And that's what you are against, okay?
Okay, because this alternative, what you said, we agree on the sense of your interpretation, they are intrinsically expressive. But the alternative you've made is false, because the alternative is always the same. We are wanted to have only the choice between an expression, which is only expression. You just said, the expression is formal by itself, form is expressive by the form. So the expression doesn't make anything. It is expressive by itself. So it is completely intransitive, with no object. And the second part of the alternative, première, l'expression n'est que expressive, et l'autre, c'est de dire, ah non, to be against, you said rightly that Shapiro was against this second position, that the expression If we want to think that the expression is relative, there is difference, the only difference, the only relationship we want to put into the concept, into an expression, is a relationship between a subject and object, a content, meaning that expression means content, a signification, representation. But of course, I totally disagree with that. But that's not a reason to think that expression is intransitive. How can we think expression not as representation with a content, with a signification? It is expressive because it means that, because it represents that, but not meaning that expression is intransitive.
You mean, if I understand you right, you want to dispute the idea that an artwork is something stable, which is there and expresses?
Completely.
Okay, so I understand you right. Yeah. But I would say that, maybe Shapiro is not very clear on this point, I would say, because at the other hand, he has this notion, what I explained here, or what I presented here, that there is so much a role of the viewer, of the, that the art of word is not a coherent whole as an object, and here is a subject. So he, at the same time, he has this idea like the production is a whole process. And
it's not process. The relationship subject-object, it's not process. It's a illusion. It's one of the most important illusions that we think that the relation of subject-object is a relation. It's not a relation. Subject-object is not a relation, because they are the two faces of the same thing.
No, I wouldn't say it's a subject and object relation. It's a relation between the viewer and the color and the whatever and the space.
And sujet, the beholder, the subject, and the painting is the object.
It's an open field. I mean, there's not one entity and the other entity, not at all.
Well, my argument will be in my paper.
I'm looking forward.
Maybe just one remark on this discussion. I really liked the last remark you made about the role of art historian, knowing as a respondent, as spirit between form and material, thus producing the actual art content maybe. And the discussion was sort of going into this circular play of positions, where also the viewer and interpretation also plays a role and feeds back into the meaning of the artwork. And maybe that was missing in this discussion. Maybe you were criticizing that it stays with Shapiro as a privilege for the artist, as producer of this content, while I think you mean to go further, that there are more positions at play, maybe.
Okay, well, I think we've made a nice bridge to the next keynote lecture by Bertrand. Thank you again, Kerstin and Adi.